8. When we talk about fights. My friend Sidney is a very handsome man. Women always smile at him when they walk by. When he is in downtown DC, if he is around the National Mall where all the tourists hang out, foreigners will ask to be in pictures with him, as if he is some strapping specimen of pure American virility. The other notable thing about Sidney is that he wears an eye patch. It's custom made so that it fits snugly in his eye socket, not over it. His brother shot his eye out with a pellet gun in an argument, but Sidney doesn't talk about that. No one in his family does, except to joke that women love the patch. Sidney's brother Mitch calls it the sex magnet. I had a friend, a psych major, who met Sidney. She said that women liked the patch because it made Sidney seem dangerous, but also wounded and vulnerable at the same time. I don't know if he'd like the wounded and vulnerable bit. Dangerous, yes. Sidney is 7 years older than I am. He is like a big brother, and he even used to beat up my big brother Rick when he was too hard on me. I loved him for it. Sidney came to visit me while I was home from college at Christmas time. We went out to a Mexican restaurant for lunch. It used to be a pizza place. I'm comfortable in restaurants because I work in one, but that's only because Sidney got me my first job waiting tables. Sidney was practically born in a restaurant and now works at his parents' cafe, which I guess he will be taking over someday. The waiter sat us down at a booth beside a window. The curtains had green cacti and yellow sagebrush on them. Sidney arranged himself on his side behind his menu. "Are Sanchos like a soft taco?" I asked. "Yeah, like a burrito, really," Sidney said. "Then I'm having the bean and cheese one. You think one will be enough?" "I don't know, man. So many choices." The waiter came. I ordered the bean and cheese Sancho with a side of nachos. Sidney ordered the same with an additional soft taco, as well as 2 waters and 2 lemonades. He said lunch was on him. "Thanks," I said. "Don't mention it." Sidney looked around at the new decor and shook his head. It looked nothing like the old pizza place. The red and white checkered tablecloths were gone, as well as the jukebox and Miss Pac-Man machine. Where they had been now stood a miniature covered wagon that rocked and swayed children on a journey along the Oregon Trail for 75 cents. I remember the last time I was here 7 years ago. "Man, that was a long time ago," Sidney said. "The halcyon days of our youth." "Halcyon? That sounds like a good word. What's it mean?" "Calm, peaceful, untroubled. It's from a Latin word that, in turn, is derived from a Greek one for a type of bird." I was being ironic. "Yeah. Actually, the last time I was here, I got into a fight." "Really?" "I was here with Kurt. It was stupid." Sidney leaned forward with his elbows on the table. His right hand played aimlessly with his fork, standing it up, then letting it fall, then standing it up again. "We had just finished dinner and were walking along the sidewalk out there, and these 2 guys were coming right at us. It was one of those things where neither party really changed direction, so we just kind of stepped around each other at the last minute. The guy on my side was this muscle-bound guy with a shaved head and a bunch of earrings. I'm moving around him, and he just smacks me with his shoulder. He was bigger than me, so I kind of flew off to the side and had to catch myself. When they were gone, Kurt is standing there laughing at me and goes, 'Pussy.' Then I darted off, just like that, not thinking, right after the musclehead with the earrings. I ran up behind him and punched him right here in the back of the neck." Sidney made a fist and put it into the base of his skull. The waiter brought us our drinks. "That's right in the medulla," I said and stuck my straw in my mouth. "Yeah, he fell flat on his face. He was stunned or something. He tried to get up but just waved his arms like a dying animal or something." "Oh, man." "His friend shoved me, and I took him by his arms and swung him around. We must have looked a little ridiculous, like square dancers or something. We spun twice before he tripped over his friend and fell between the curb and the tire of this parked car. I got in one punch on the side of his head before Kurt came and pulled me away. He couldn't talk, he was laughing so hard." "Did the guy get up?" Which one? The one that was convulsing. Must have. No cop showed up at my door with a warrant for my arrest as a murderer. Lucky. Can you pass me the dessert menu? Sidney reached over to the napkin dispenser where the dessert menu was propped, then slid it to me. I looked at it. Fried ice cream, mucho choco brownie with ice cream, vanilla ice cream with caramel and nuts. I hated nuts. Can I see that when you're done? Sidney asked. I handed it to him. Nothing good. He studied it, his eyebrow over his good eye lowered. He flipped the menu over and set it flat on the table. I remember this other time when I was living in Charlottesville. It was that same year, but it was December. Anyway, there was snow on the ground, but it was old snow. It had hardened into that really gritty, crusty stuff. I was coming out of my house. Your apartment or the house with the frat boys? The frat boys. I've got stories about them too. But we were coming out of the house. This was when I was dating Karina. It was me, Karina, and my friend Mohammed. We were walking to the car when these three guys pop up from behind this pile of snow and start pegging us with these ice balls. At first it was funny and all, oh no, we're being attacked, real funny. Then one of them flings this flat piece of ice like a frisbee. Sidney waved the menu as if he was about to demonstrate by flinging it across the restaurant. And it hits Karina right in the face. She crumples. I look down and see she's bleeding. Did they mean to hit her in the face? I don't know. I didn't care. It's not like they gave any thought to it. If they had, they would have realized, hey, this could really hurt someone. Anyway, I flew, man. They had already started to run. There was this fat one, and he was trailing after the others. I think he was the one who hit her. It's always been the fat ones. They're bitter because they got made fun of when they were little. You think so? I know so. I know a thing about being teased. Think about it. No one was probably sensitive to them when they were the little pudgy kids on the playground. So why should they be sensitive to others when they get older? They've got all sorts of resentments built up. Anyway, I couldn't catch up with him. Then again, I could have if I wanted to. He was a lard ass. But instead I just threw my arms up and dove into his back. He fell down. Now he still thought this whole thing was a joke, and he was laughing when I rolled him over. I was like, you think that's funny? And I cocked my arm back, but Muhammad was behind me and held my arm saying, no man, chill. I tried getting my arm free but couldn't, so with my other arm, I just took a fistful of the fat guy's hair and started knocking his head against the pavement. Pretty ridiculous. Where'd you learn to fight like that? I don't know if I would even call it fighting. It was scrapping. It's not like I learned. You just had to fight to survive in my house. 5 brothers? You're going to have some rumbles. And I think my family was extra competitive. Mitch, especially. Like he was always trying to test me. He paused for a moment, as if his thoughts had gone off into a different direction. Earth to Sidney. Sorry, where was I? Brothers? Yeah, anyway, that doesn't mean we didn't stick up for each other. I remember when Mitch got his ass whooped by these trailer trash kids. Chris and Brent just got in the car, went right to their trailer park, and beat them up in front of their mother. Their mom? Hey, it's the rules of engagement, man. You mess with someone, and they've got family, you better be ready for the retaliation. She understood that. It wasn't that bad anyway. They just gave the kids something to think about. Actually, they said the mother didn't even seem to care. Then again, I wouldn't have put up a fight if Chris and Brent had showed up at my door. Maybe if I had a baseball bat or a shotgun. I took a deep drink of my lemonade through my straw. The waiter brought out my nachos. He was an old guy and had spoken with a Latino accent when he took our orders. He seemed friendly. Sidney thanked him. I got in a lot of fights in Charlottesville, Sidney said, reflective. It was just a crazy atmosphere. College is a weird place. But I wasn't in college. I had transferred from community college and had deferred another year to earn some money for school. I was working. That made it worse. I was an outsider, so I was always being tested. After a while of that, you start to develop this mentality. You don't walk into a party looking for your friends. The first thing you look for is the biggest guy there. And if you go in like that, you give off this vibe and the biggest guy ends up finding you. Frats are stupid. You're paying money so you can have friends. Yeah, tell me about it. I remember one time my roommate, Wells, had 3 freshman pledges at the house vacuuming and doing dishes for us. See, Wells was a senior member of the frat, so for hazing week, these guys had to be his maids. Did they have to dress in French maid outfits? As a matter of fact, they did. I laughed, and so did Sidney. It was something seeing this bunch of 18-year-old guys walking around in fishnets and lacy frills. I mean, it was not pretty, with their hairy legs and stuff. I can imagine, but I don't want to. Anyway, I came in from work and sat down with a beer to watch Star Trek. I was dead tired, and these little pledges in these maid outfits were whining about how hard hazing was on them. At a commercial, I turned to them and said, I don't know why you subject yourself to that. If anyone tried to haze me, I'd come after them with a gun. They got all flustered. Flabbergasted. Flabber what? Flabbergasted means flustered, shocked, like gobsmacked. Flabbergasted. Gobsmacked. Or if you really want to up your nerd credentials, you could go with flummoxed. Flummoxed? I like that one. I'll learn something from you if nothing else, Brainiac, Sidney laughed. He'd always called me Brainiac, but in a good way. He had always wanted me to do well in school, always told me not to worry about the other, bigger, athletic kids who picked on me. He told me I'd do better in the long run because I liked to read, even when I didn't have to. He'd often ask to borrow my books, or ask me to tell him about them when he couldn't find time to read them. Sometimes at the end of the day, his eye was just too tired. For Christmas, I had bought him a bunch of books on tape. He kept talking. Anyway, the pledges are all like, no, man, you don't get a chance to fight back when your frat brothers haze you. They come in while you're sleeping, wrap you up in your own blankets, and carry you out. I'm like, I don't care. I'd fight back, man. They were silent for a while. They obviously thought I was just full of myself. Then I said, no offense, but the whole thing is kind of stupid. All that inconvenience just so you can pay a certain amount of money each month, so you can point to a drunk undergrad in a bar and call him brother? I've got 4 brothers, and they're my brothers because they came out between the same 2 legs as I did, not because I pay them. That was the nail in my coffin, I think. Why? Did they do something? Not then. But that night there was a party at the frat house. They got together with some of their friends, had a few drinks, got their courage up, and thought, that guy Sidney is an asshole. Let's haze him. So I'm lying in bed, and I wake up as they're lifting me up to their shoulders. They were still in their French maid outfits, too. They were required to keep them on. He shook his head. Man, embarrassing. But I have to admit, they did a good job wrapping me in my blankets. I couldn't move. I was like, okay, really cool. I'm being hazed. Yeah, this is really cool. Put me down. Then one of them punched me right in my back, and then they started punching me all over. I guess it was part of the ritual or something. We were all on the steps now. There was about 6 of them. They had brought friends, and I started flailing my arms and going nuts. Then we all just tumbled down the steps. It was a mess. Legs, arms, feet everywhere. I started crawling my way back. All I had on were my boxer shorts, and someone grabs them. I didn't want to be naked on top of being hazed, so I turned around and decked the guy in the face. Then it was like King of the Hill meets WrestleMania. It was a race to get to the top of the steps. I stepped on shoulders, heads, anything to get back up there. I was punching guys, boxing ears, scraping necks, grabbing them by their bra straps and fishnets. I got to the top and ran for my room. I could hear them tromping down the hall after me. They must have been pissed off by then. Yeah, the adrenaline and alcohol were not a good mix. I took a nacho. The cheese made a string that stretched out between my hand and the plate, then fell down on the table. I tried getting it with my napkin. Sidney was animated, gesturing with his hands. He kept knocking the straw sticking out of his drink. I got to my room. They'd unscrewed the knob to get in, so I couldn't lock it. I was in my underwear, for God's sake. I didn't feel like letting these guys manhandle me. I had this window in my room that never stayed open, so I had a 2x4 there to hold it up. I grabbed the 2x4 and spun around and whacked the first guy that had rushed in right behind me. It must have made a big old crack sound, but I didn't hear it because the window slammed simultaneously. I went to town on them, the only advantage I had, because I was still outnumbered 5-1. I thought there were 6. Not after I laid out that one with a 2x4. Oh, okay. As I was saying, the only advantage I had was that the room was narrow and they couldn't outflank me. Sounds like the Battle of Thermopylae. Thermopylae what? Thermopylae. Battle in 480 BC when a few hundred Greeks led by the Spartans held off over 100,000 Persians for 7 days by positioning themselves in a narrow pass. Sounds pretty badass. Still didn't work out for the Greeks, at least not that day. They lost the battle but eventually won the war. Nice, Sidney said, nodding. I should read about that one. But your story. Yeah, anyway, they backed out the door and I chased them down the hallway, wailing away at the last one with the board. They drove down the stairs like the house was on fire. I stood there at the top, holding the board like I was up at bat, screaming, "Come on, motherfuckers, you want more?" But they didn't take me up on it. Then I heard a crash in my room. I went back. The first guy I had hit had been left in there. He had been trying to get out the window and it had closed on his leg. He was sitting on the sill trying to lift the window back up, but he had no leverage. He was trapped. I came in and started whacking his shin. You should have seen him squirm. He was hanging out a second-story window in fishnets. Show him some mercy. Did they show me any mercy? A few moments before, this same guy burst in my room and tried kicking the shit out of me. Eye for an eye. I looked at the black-brown patch of leather fitting snug over his eye socket. He wasn't being ironic. Maybe Hammurabi had it right. Pause. Who's Hammurabi? Babylonian king who made up the earliest set of surviving laws, Hammurabi's Code. He was the one who said, eye for an eye. I said it, feeling a bit awkward looking at his eye patch. He didn't seem to mind. I hadn't meant anything by it, but even if I had, I bet he would have been all right. I was one of the few people he let ask him about his patch. When I was little, I had asked him sincerely how he winked at people if he only had one eye. He had laughed, made an exaggerated wink with his good eye, winding up his mouth into this ridiculous grin, and had said, "Like this, Danny boy?" He nodded, looking out the restaurant window. Well, Hammurabi was onto something. Someone fucks with you, you fuck them up back. Someone should carve that on a stone tablet. What happened to the guy? He got his leg out after a while and pulled a Peter Pan down to the ground. He was okay? Yeah, bled all over my carpet though, but we weren't going to get that security deposit back anyway. The waiter arrived with our Sanchos. They were too hot to eat. We both cut a piece, then let it steam on the end of our forks. I expected immediate retaliation, Sidney said. I pushed my desk up against my door and got back in bed with my 2x4. When I woke up, it was light outside, and someone was pounding on my door. It was Wells. I was like, man, now I'm gonna have to whoop him. I opened the door, and he's standing there with his hand extended. I just want to shake your hand, man, he says. I was like, why's that? He goes, we saw those pledges when you were done with them last night. You fucked them up. That's pretty impressive. 6-1, man. I want to shake your hand. I realized I was still in my underwear and wanted to get rid of him, so I shook, and he promised me no one from the frat would ever bother me again. They didn't. What did Karina do when she found out? Oh, she came over, said, poor baby, and then we fucked. That was the great thing about Karina. Always ready to have sex. I'd come home from the gym some days without even having a shower, and she'd be waiting at my place, and we would go right into it. It was great when I finally got my own apartment. I gave her a key. I'd get home, she'd have dinner cooking on the stove, then give me a back rub with her shirt off. She'd rub her breasts up against my back because she knew I liked that. We'd usually end up having sex after that. I started to eat my Sancho. That's quite a girl, I said around the cheese and beans in my mouth. Yeah, she got me in my share of trouble, though. She was always wearing these tight pants and skirts. We'd go to a party and some drunk frat boy would inevitably grope her. Remember the time I came to visit you and had scabs on both my knuckles? Yeah? I had been at a party with her the night before, and this guy stuck his hand right in her crotch. Right in front of me. Then he saw me and laughed. He laughed? Yeah. I headbutted him, then followed with these 2 punches to his mouth. I think I knocked one of his teeth out. For groping your girlfriend. I had had a bad week. There was other shit going on too, and he just became a receptacle for all that. Sidney paused and took a bite of his Sancho, his jaw moving slowly. Then he shook his head back and forth. He swallowed his food and took a drink. But you're right. It was no way to handle stuff like that. On the upside, the amount of physical confrontations I've had with people has dropped considerably since I stopped dating that girl. She was nothing but trouble. I've never dated a girl like that. It's all right. You will one of these days. It's a rite of passage. Come on, you're what, in your 2nd semester of college? It's about time you got your carrot wet. The food in my mouth was too hot, and I took a drink of water. The plate underneath my Sancho was damp, making the tortilla soggy. I didn't care. I tried not to think about what might have gone on in the kitchen while they were preparing it. Every waiter knew that the food served in a restaurant was never as immaculate as it was supposed to be. Eat. Don't think. I couldn't imagine being angry enough to hurt another person. Sidney had once told me that when he was really angry, he sometimes literally saw red flashes before his eyes. I was too repressed to have such feelings, but I remember seeing such flashes once when I was 2 or 3 while throwing a temper tantrum and tossing a broken toy at a window. I've never had to fight to get by, I said. Sidney shrugged. Count your blessings. Also, your dad is a really laid-back guy. He grew up going to private schools and stuff. Lived in Europe. So, my father grew up in downtown Austin. He didn't succeed there by being nice. He's kind of passed that on to us. It's that nature-nurture thing. I remember my father and my oldest brother Chris getting into it once. Dad just said, "We'll take it outside." Chris was like, "Sure." Chris wasn't out the door before he was knocked cold. Your dad hit your brother? Yeah, he was still drinking then. What did you think about that? It upset me. No one likes to see their family members beating each other, but on the other hand, it was good. It was like Chris had challenged the hierarchy, and it had stood up under pressure. Dad was still king, and we all knew it. That's not true now? No. Dad's not confrontational like that now that he's sober. He's mellow and serene now. It's definitely for the best. What had your dad and Chris been arguing about? Nothing, really. It was Chris and my mom. He had mouthed off to her and my dad wouldn't have it. Huh, that's interesting. My father taught us a few things to live by. Always do your best, and then no one can say anything about you, and if they do, settle it honorably. But don't step out there if you don't plan on finishing it. He pointed his fork at me. Never run from a fight, Daniel. You'll never stop running. I nodded and had a nacho. We ate for a while. I finished my Sancho and was still hungry, but didn't say anything. I'd have a sandwich when I got home. I ate all the nachos that had cheese on them, then picked at the olive and pepper slices that were left on the plate. Sidney started on his taco. All this talk about Karina is making me miss having a girlfriend. You miss Karina or just having a girlfriend? Karina. That girl. The only girl I have ever met who I had perfect sexual chemistry with. I was always changing those sheets on my bed. Something inside me winced. I felt I'd never have sex like that. I'd never actually had sex yet. I didn't say anything. There was this stripper that gave me her number the other night. I might give a call when I get home. How'd you meet her? It was just last month. Jim's fiancée was out of town, so we were having a guys' night out. We were visiting all these strip joints down at Virginia Beach. Daniel, Some of these girls were so fine. We got to this one place. Jim and I have this game. We try to get the ugliest strippers to do a lap dance for the other. Jim had this real fat, disgusting one picked out for me. He pointed at her and asked the manager to have her treat me to a private show in the back room. See, there were these private rooms you can go to and get a private show. The manager calls this girl over, but he points to the wrong girl. The girl that came over was so hot. Tight little body, brunette, huge boobs, and a great ass. Jim was about to shit himself. She took me by the edge of my jacket and led me to the back. I was like, "Thanks, Jim." We get to the room. There's 2 couches and a bouncer sitting there in the corner, but his chair is turned so that he can only see one of the couches. We sit down on the couch that was in bouncer's field of vision, and she does her thing on my lap. Now, I'm telling you, Dan, this girl was so beautiful, and I say to her, I know it's against the rules, but I was wondering if I could just put my hand right there. I said this looking at her butt cheek. Then I said, really starry-eyed, "You are so beautiful." Then she goes, "You're not so bad yourself." Then she grabs me by the collar and pulls me to the couch that the bouncer can't see. She takes my hands and runs them all over her body, everywhere. I got her off a bit with my hand. She was going nuts. I went to kiss her, but she said no. She'd lose her job. He stopped and looked out the window, blew some air out between his lips, then took a drink of his lemonade until the straw made an empty sound. What happened? We went back outside when she was done, but she slipped me her card with her phone number on it. Wow. I'll have to call her. I took a drink of the water that had formed under the melting ice in my glass. I crunched some ice in my mouth. We didn't leave that place in good standing, though. How so? Well, after 2 in the morning, they start bringing out the second shift strippers. All the ugly ones that look better after you've been drinking. Anyway, this fat, disgusting woman is up there. We're talking 250 pounds, maybe more. I don't know how she moved. She had really gross skin, too. I think they just had her there for a joke. All the guys were cheering for her, but Jim and I were grossed out. I sort of felt bad for her. We went to the bar to get away and watched the topless bartender. After the fat woman finished her act, she came over to the bar where a bunch of guys were buying her drinks. She was so disgusting. She was old, man, and had all this hair on her chin, too. I don't know why she was dancing. Sad. Anyway, she leans over the bar beside Jim, and he moves away. Then she puts her hand on his cheek and says, turning his head to face her, "Hey, honey, you scared of a real woman?" And Jim bats her hand away and says, "I'm scared of the ugliest, fattest skanko I've ever seen." Now, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have knocked her hand, and he shouldn't have said what he said. It was just mean, and that was just the beginning of it all. Because she gasps, takes her drink, and throws it on Jim, then starts slapping him. Then she starts hitting him with fists. All the other men were laughing while Jim was cowering. He was half the size of her. I try to get between them, and she punches me instead. That pissed me off. I was just trying to break it up. But at that point, I still felt bad for her. I just ignored her. Then another stripper comes up and claws my face. I get really protective when people start reaching for my face. You get that way with one eye. I sort of lost control then. I grabbed her by the throat and shoved her. Then the first one came up with a bottle. I looked at the bouncer, but he was laughing. What a fucked up joint. The fat woman didn't swing the bottle at me, but she did hit Jim with it. She didn't hit him hard, but glanced his head. Still, she could have done some damage. Jim was dazed for a second. She had this feather boa around her shoulders that I grabbed and tugged. That threw her off balance. She was in heels after all, and she goes crashing onto this table. She was crying, though. Actually, she was hysterical. I guess Jim had hit a nerve. It was mayhem. And the bouncers didn't intervene? No. Looking back, I wonder if stuff like that was normal for that place. Crazy. Anyway, Jim still wasn't back on his feet, so I took him by the shoulders and pushed him through the crowd like a battering ram. We made it out the door. The big woman was still following us with that bottle. We sprinted across the parking lot. It was gravel, so we were slipping because we couldn't get our footing. She was throwing rocks at us now. We were laughing by now. The whole thing was kind of comedic. A farce. Yep, that. So we get in Jim's truck and we hear this big rock hit the back windshield. Jim flips. He's like, fucking bitch. He backs out and sits there waiting for her to get closer to the truck. He had this evil look in his eye. He let her get real close. Then he spun the back tires and sprayed her with gravel. She was just wearing this skimpy outfit and the feather boa, so she was getting pelted right on bare skin. That stopped her dead. Last I saw of her, she was collapsed in that parking lot, rocks falling off her as she sobbed. Jim's a mean fucker. Sidney was quiet a moment after that, his mouth a thin line, the corners tugging downward. He brings out the worst in me, too. But she shouldn't have chased him. Sidney paid the bill and the waiter brought us change with 2 mints. We unwrapped them and popped them in our mouths. These stories are crazy, Sidney said. But if there's anything you learn from them, it's that you just gotta stick up for yourself when the time comes, you know? He said it like he was trying to salvage the conversation, pull some moral out of it. I wondered if he was trying to convince himself or me. The hard candy clicked against my teeth. I nodded. I guess I understood. We got up and walked towards the door. Sidney stopped. Hold on, I need to piss. He headed for the bathroom. I walked outside and waited by his Jeep. I blew on my hands, then dug them into the pockets of my jeans. Across the street, the Best Western sign was glowing pointlessly in the daylight. There was only one car in the hotel's parking lot. I wondered how much warmer it was in all those empty rooms with identical bedspreads, identical bedside tables, and identical glass ashtrays. Then I remembered Sidney never locked the doors of his Jeep. The door opened, and I stepped inside. I wasn't any warmer. The Jeep's covering was just canvas and plastic after all. The seats actually made me even colder. I stared at the still gauges with their sleeping orange needles. Sidney was still in the restaurant. I thought about what he had said, and I knew that if the situation ever arose, and my honor was questioned, if that test ever came, I'd never be able to stick up for myself. I would fail. I sat in the cold and silence, trying to figure out what, exactly, that meant.